Welcome to Old Cowtown Museum, to our winter lecture series. This is the third in our lecture series. Today we're going to be talking about Currier and Ives, the lithographers who were basically the chronicler of Victorian times. The next three programs will be on, if you're not aware, we've opened a new section of the museum called Beginning Wichita, in conjunction with the Wichita Warrior Society and Intertribal Warrior Society. And we're going to be doing some background information on that area, the Native Americans and their presence and the like. So yeah, I hope it'll be something that'll be interesting. So without any further, unless there's any real quick questions, we'll just go ahead and get started. Would you mind raising your hand if you can all hear and things are looking well? Okay, looks very good, very good. Okay. Now, my presentation about Currier and Ives is going to have a lot of pictures, and whenever I had planned this, I had anticipated that we would probably be in person. So I'm hoping that on your screen, you'll be able to see as well. So let us go ahead and get started. I'm going to switch over to Screenshare and we will begin. I will say this is very strange not to have the audience responding to what I'm doing. So I guess I will just go ahead and begin. So you can see on the masthead, Currier and Ives, defining and reflecting American culture. And there it goes. If you lived in Victorian times, most likely you would have had one of these particular lithographs on your wall at your house. These are probably the two most favorite, most used lithographs that the company printed. Winter scene, which of course is very, very applicable for today, as well as a very home front scene. So what was going on in this particular era whenever they began printing their lithography? A very tumultuous time leading up into the Civil War, a high degree of change, industrialization with the Industrial Revolution, displacing people from farms to town because of all the technology. We also have a lot of immigration folks coming from overseas, as well as a lot of people moving around the country because of the stuff that was going on. So there was just an awful lot of change, and people found that hard to relate to. We, of course, had the Civil War with I was just reading last night that the number that's usually quoted, this 624,000, is probably actually low, that maybe it could be as 20% higher. But the amount of people that impacted, almost like today, most people know somebody that's been affected by the virus. The same would have been affected in their time period. Most people had some experience with someone that was in the Civil War. The amount of money that was spent was going to cause great hardship, and then unexpected consequences. What's going to happen to the slaves? About 1 million were displaced, and where are they going to be? How are they going to fit into society? Following the war is over, we have the Reconstruction period till 1877. A lot of the things that had been going on before then were sped up, I guess would be a good way to say it. Technological change. Technological change was happening. We now have electricity, telephones. We still have the migration. But we also have the nation becoming very tired with what was called the Negro problem. what's going to happen with the African Americans? How are they going to fit in society? And it was just becoming more and more taxing. Um, at the end of Reconstruction, a lot of the U.S. government influence and actions in the South were removed, and in a lot of ways, the South reverted back to some of the ways of doing before the Civil War happened. So, with all of this change that was happening, there was a real desire for nostalgia. And so that was something that people were really looking for, not necessarily consciously, but it's what occurred. Now, whenever I talk to people in our about our time period, it is so hard to imagine what life was like. Um, Today, we have video, we have our phones, we have TV, we have computers, we have images everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. Imagine the billboards that you drive by and the circulars in your newspaper. All of that would have been gone. And you basically had, if you had anything, you had text. Not the texting, but you just had text and print. And so imagine how that would have changed your life. There was no way to grasp the horror of war. There was no way to grasp the horrors of catastrophes. Um, I mentioned the housewife. There was no prints for the parlor. There was no way for a teacher to tell what was happening in the country. 1835, the ruins of the Merchant Fire Exchange in New York. So this was one of the first lithographs that is actually published and printed that is actually focused on the news. It was printed by Nathaniel Currier. He began shop in 1817, orphaned at age 8, which some people attribute to his great drive in his work ethic. Apprenticed at 15, basically printing handbills, sheet music, flyers, and things like that. And that's pretty much his mainstay. But in 1835, he got the idea to create this lithograph of this terrible, terrible tragedy in New York. And in 4 days, printed thousands of copies. And basically, he hit on a nerve. He hit on something that people were interested in. And so he decided that that would be something that he would continue on with. Now, to create a lithography, what you have is large slabs of limestone that you polish and you draw on. You ink them and then you put them on a press and you print from there. It's a little bit, the drawings are in black and white. And then he was not really using true lithography. We'll talk about that in just a second. But he hired people to use watercolors to color the prints and give it the look it did. Each print was kind of unique. While I was looking for pictures to put on this particular presentation, there were several prints of the same kind that had different colors. In one set, the ladies' dresses were blue, and another set they were red. So by doing it that way, it makes gives a little bit more chance. So now, if you were a true lithographer, Louis Prang was probably the foremost advocate and practitioner of it. Largely, what you have are successive stones with successive colors that impression by impression by impression create a final image. Whereas Currier and Ives were using watercolors to basically give the effect. Prang's process was much, much, much more involved. It took a lot more work. Therefore, he was not able to produce as much as what Currier and Ives were able to produce in just a short period of time. 5 years later, the Lexicon steamship fire off of Long Island was his second print or photographic journalism, I guess you would call it. Again, very, very popular, printed lots and lots and lots, sold lots and lots. And so he became, or this is the masthead from his business, producing the best, cheapest, and most popular pictures. I love this. I took this from another place that his prints were nailed and tacked and glued with homemade flour and water paste to the walls of houses, shops, garages, and even barns. And so his images were everywhere. He created lots and lots of what I call the ephemera of everyday living. Um, if you think about it, before this, most everything was black and white. With lithography, he's able to add some color to it. And he also addresses lots of different methods. So if you wanted something nice for your house, mottos were always good. Marriage certificates. Here we've got two examples. On the left-hand side, we've got two holes for the people eventually to put their daguerreotype or photographs in so you can see the man and the woman. This certificate here, if you're not sure what the job of a wife or a husband is, why this certificate has them listed out on either side so you can use it as a quick and handy reference should you need that. People were also keeping track of family history. Genealogy was very, very important. And so here we have a family register. There were at least 15 different kinds that I saw. This was one that I picked that seemed the most interesting. He also created lots of different certificates. This is one for Sunday school, and then the other side is one for school rewards. These came on a big sheet, and you could go ahead and cut them into smaller pieces and hand them out to your students for good behavior and perfect lessons and punctuality and that sort of a thing. So school rewards cards were very, very popular back until the 1830s. And some of the first printing that were done were creating those particular things. So we also have trade cards, basically business cards. On the top left, you can see an advertisement for Dr. Friend's cough balsam. Here we've got on the top left, we've got Hood's sarsaparilla. But a lot of these were blank, and so you would purchase them in sheets of 10, 14, 20, and then you would take them to your own printer who would give the imprint of the name of your business and the like, and so you can hand them out. So I love the one with the bear chants. A lot of these are eye-catching. They're meant to, just like advertising today, they're meant to grab your attention so that you can go ahead and get out your message. So he also created lots of certificates. Currier and Ives were very, very, very enamored with fire department. Most of them were volunteer at the time. And fire was also something that was very popular with the general public. So here we have two different certificates that if you join the volunteer fire department, these could be something that you would take home with you. So they also printed sheet music. That was the way you got new music out, other than hearing an instrument being played and trying to learn it by ear. So here we have a very popular song called The Handsome Man, a humorous song of some kind. And then we've got some dance music on the other side that you could purchase. And so these everyday ephemera were basically the bread and butter of what he was using to make his living. In 1852, Ives joined with Currier, and he joined as kind of a bookkeeper and slowly became more and more of a partner. He was one of the people that really steered Currier away from so much focus on news and more focusing on the ephemera of everyday life and what people might find interesting. I love it though. They are in the business of selling and selling what it is that people want, not necessarily um, what you think that they need. Or well, I'm not saying that right. Um, Currier had been focusing a lot on news as well as catastrophes in life, and so he said, "Well, let us tap into this new vein of nostalgia and settlement, and give people what it is that they would need and want." So, influence, yes. Today we talk a lot about mass media. By the time that their business closes in the late 1890s, over 7,000 original images were created by the firm. And that's a little bit of a distractor, because for each one of those individual prints, there were hundreds and thousands of each particular print that were made, and they sold. Because they did not put as much time in the printing like the other gentleman did, Mr. Mr. Prang. They were able to crank out a lot, 3 to 4 new prints each week, with unlimited printings. And the price, who can beat that? 25 cents for a new picture. Boy, that's just great. Price cheap to sell is basically what they were trying to do. So what did they focus on? Before 1860, they focused on the themes of growth and progress. That is what people were interested in, a lot of optimism coming up to the Civil War. After 1865 and after the Civil War, um, people were becoming very disenchanted with city life, smoke and crowdedness, and they miss the country life, or at least what they thought the country life was like. And so that became the demand of what people were interested in. And so Currier and Ives responded appropriately. They did have many messages behind their drawings and their impressions. Preach piety, family, loyalty, hard work, and the American success story, all of those good things. So, but most importantly, and I underlined it on the bottom, they presented a unified vision of the country to a diverse-based union, and provided a storyline for all citizens and new immigrants to latch on. Regionalism was the Civil War brought out a lot of regionalism. How you did things in the South was not how you did things in the West, and how you did them in the West was not how you did them in the East. But Currier and Ives helped solidify the country through their mass media, providing values and images that would bring people together, which was kind of the idea. So lots of different themes. I've tried to sort out what they printed in kind of a coherent fashion. I love this though. European, something I never even thought about. European had tradition and memory. United States had no past, no memory. They printed over 250 prints of American history. The Plymouth Pilgrims at Plymouth and the landing of Columbus were probably two of the largest selling prints from that particular time. They also printed over 600 images of the founding fathers and different heroes that were happening. And a lot of this information and a lot of the pictures that they were drawing from then becomes the basis for a lot of history that is taught into school in a more unified manner. So just as an example, we have Washington crossing the Delaware. We have the American martyr, President Lincoln, on his deathbed. I don't know if you can see the picture of Washington on the other side, the spirit of the Union. So images that everybody in all of the different schools could be taught. And so we have more of a unified vision of what our country was about. Here we have the first ringing of the Liberty Bell. Here we have the writers of the Declaration of Independence. And here we have Franklin and his kite experiment. So creating a vision that everyone could buy into and everyone could see and agree upon. They also worked hard to celebrate democracy. Um, this very famous lithograph called Arguing the Point. Basically, a hunter is stopped by a homestead, and they are sitting down and looking at a newspaper and discussing the issues of the day, face-to-face conversation. That is how democracy happens. Um, an invested and an active populace is what democracy is all about. And so they advocated that very, very, very strongly. They also advocated a sense of patriotism. This is from the Civil War. On the top right, we have a young lady who is dreaming of her husband, soldier, who is out fighting. On the bottom left, we have the husband who is dreaming of the home front and coming back home eventually. So the sacrifice and the personal costs, all for the common good. One thing to mention about they did print copies of pictures of the battles that were going on at that particular time. More often, they printed images of the ones that the Union wore. It's also interesting to note that the Union forces are in total order, while the Confederate forces are in total disarray and unorganized. They were criticized to some degree for publicizing a sanitized version of the war. And yet at the same time, people were reacting very strongly to Matthew Brady's uncensored pictures of the warfare with the bloated bodies and things like that. So this was a more patriotic version of what they would have liked you folks to see and understand. Currier and Ives also believed in the common man as hero. As I mentioned earlier, fire was something that was very, very, very interesting to people, but also very, very concerning. At this particular time, most all fire departments were a volunteer in nature, and they created quite a few images that have to do with firefighters and the work that they were doing. They never created a series on policemen, largely because the New York City police were considered to be rather corrupt at that particular time. So some of my police friends would dispute they should feel like they should be given part of the circumstance as well. But at that particular time, maybe not as much. So here's the Great Chicago Fire in 1871. Imagine if you are someone who is living in Kansas or someone who's living in Seattle, and someone tells you that the city of Chicago burned. Well, first, you might not have an idea of how big the city was, and then the idea of what that would have looked like. And so this is the artist's conception of what that would have looked like. They did quite a few lithographs of the Chicago fire just because it was such a dramatic tragedy. Here we have the evacuation of the city, and one can just get a sense by looking at it as how dramatic and how strong the destruction was. So something that was very well communicated. Now, I wrote a couple of things down. In our era, there was very little regulation. Fires were a constant source of fear for people. Most structures were built out of wood. Some brick was rather expensive. In Wichita, we had the same experience. I think last week, if you heard Keith's presentation, he talked about how city planning was done, brick buildings on the corners of a city block with wooden structures on the middle so that you wouldn't have the whole town burn it at one particular time. So amazing stuff. So 1 year after the Chicago fire, um, um, we had the Boston fire. I just love the idea that you could see it as far away as the coast of Maine. Just imagine how intense that would have been. Not as big as the Chicago fire, but certainly something that was very impactful of the people's lives. So here we have a picture of the fire in Boston. And I think what's interesting about this image is that the fire is on the left-hand side and it's slowly heading toward the right-hand side. The fires were getting larger and larger and larger, with nothing really to stop it. Even the brave and valiant firemen were using hand pumpers at the time. And so there would have been very little they could have done to have stopped things. So, let me go backwards. There we go. Currier and Ives were also very, very large champions of westward expansion, especially after the Civil War. This is probably my favorite lithograph of theirs, Progress of the Century. The teletype reads, "The liberty and the union are now forever one and inseparable." We have the steam press in the back printing out newspapers. We have the steam railroad. We also have the steam ship. And so the idea of progress happening. Dear, let's see, previous and previous. Okay, this was out of order. This image here is probably one of the most well-known pictures about the expansion of the West. A couple of things you'll note. There are some Native Americans on the right-hand side, but the wide expanse of land here. In our particular time, the farmers were the people who were the salt of the earth. They were the people that were utilizing the soil in the best particular way. And the idea that we had wide open territory that the Native Americans were keeping as hunting grounds just did not seem to make any real sense. I think the other thing that's fascinating too is that they are directly contradicting and fighting against this whole image of the great American desert, of which Kansas and the Midwest were considered part of. You have the mountains of Colorado in the background, and you have the plains of Kansas that are looking quite a bit green in the foreground. And so here we are, we're off to occupy and fill up the rest of the country. This I was a little bit curious whenever you're promoting Western expansion, but at the same time you're showing a picture of a fire on the prairie. We've got the buffalo in the background. So I don't know what kind of a message that they're sending here. Prairie fires were terribly dangerous, and once they started, they kept going because there were no obstacles to keep them from going. And so maybe they were advocating, come and settle the West so that we can get rid of them. I'm not exactly sure, but we do know that people enjoyed the images of trains, and they were all so fascinated with the images of fire. So maybe that's what they were looking for. I'm not quite sure. So here we have some hunting on the plains. We've got the excitement of the buffalo hunt and the buffalo chase. And so until you become a good farmer, not only the Native Americans can do the hunting, but our hunters can do that as well. And so here we go about taming the West. Now, as I mentioned, railroads were very, very popular images that were part of their stack of images that they're sold. In the railroads were the engine of manifest destiny. They tamed the West and moved people forward. But it was kind of interesting because Currier and Ives really worked hard to help rehabilitate the image of the railroad. They basically fell out of favor, the railroads did, because of the monopolies and the combinations, um, price gouging. The various people that participated in the railroads, farmers, small town business people, entrepreneurs, laborers, all of those particular people, they looked at the railroad with quite a bit of disdain from each point of view because of the monopoly that they had. But Currier and Ives were so entranced by the technology and so much the cheerleader that they worked really, really hard to help them put out a positive image of what was going on as far as that technology was concerned. Mm. Oh my, clipper ships. They also printed a lot of pictures about clipper ships for two reasons. The rest of the world, whenever they started selling internationally, the rest of the world were very, very, very keen on sailing ships. First of all, they're just glorious to watch go through the waters. But for those countries that had not mechanized yet, this would be something that they could identify with and they can purchase it well. Unfortunately, the new technology that's coming along is going to make them obsolete. Steamships, I didn't include any, but not only there's a whole stable of clipper ships, but there's also a whole stable of steam-powered paddle boats that are part of their image collections as well. With over 7,000 images to pick from, one has to be rather selective. So again, more cheerleading of technology. While Currier and Ives have a great love of racehorses, um, and the population did as well. They have a lot of prints of it. They also acknowledge that the horse may be going out of fashion, and so we have a race of a velocipede from 1868, I believe, was the date of the print. So we have technology that's coming in on them as well. So they also had, as I mentioned earlier, they really promoted things like piety and good work ethic and the like. Um, they were very, very concerned on how to create a moral society and moral citizens. If you can read the different rungs on the ladder, we have industry, temperance, prudence, integrity, and economy, punctuality, courage, perseverance. All of those are the ladder that are going to take you up to the good life, success, goodwill to men, self-respect, and all the other. If you look at the very, very background, we have the stock exchange, we have lotteries, we have labor strikes, all sorts of things that are going to be distracting you from the good work of becoming a good citizen and to gaining your reward. So some people, they also included a lot of religious elements, the morality behind the what you're doing. They definitely did not believe in people being amoral. Um, being a good Christian person was something that they were definitely advocating. They also printed a lot of scenes from the Bible. Good Samaritan, Last Supper, the nativity scene, a lot of different things. But and they did this out of a sense of educating the population, but also realizing that religion was under attack at that particular time. Um, as I mentioned, the Protestants splintered because of slavery. We have um, Presbyterians in the north and south on either side of that particular issue. With more and more immigration, um, just before and just after the Civil War, we had a lot of folks coming over from Europe with different faith expressions. We also have Darwin really becoming to the fore in this particular time. And so a lot of people felt like religion was under attack, and so we had to do what we could to go against that particular movement. So they certainly responded to the need of the populace there. They were also very, very strong believers in temperance. If you're not familiar, temperance movement started in the northeastern part of the United States, quite a few advocating for total abstinence from alcohol. In this particular time, the problem was that a lot of men would drink their wages and have nothing left to feed their family and support their family. In the bottom left, we've got a family man who is coming home. He's not going to the bars with his friends. He's coming into straight home, and he's creating a good and proper life. We also, here are two images that were somewhat controversial. In the top left corner, this is President Washington saying farewell to his aides. And on the table, there's a bottle of sherry, and he is toasting all of his companions with an alcoholic beverage. There was so much public negative reaction to this that in the subsequent printings, Washington has his hand on his chest, but he's no longer holding a cup, and his hat is sitting on the table where the liquor used to be. So again, promoting the idea that the temperance is happening. And so now, home, morality happens at home. There were a lot of things that were going on at that particular time. I've mentioned a lot of people moving from the country to the city, a lot of social upheaval, but they strongly believed that if you had a home that was very, very welcoming and a good refuge from all of the stuff that's going on, a sanctuary, what people often refer to today. I get a kick out of the home improvement shows where they talk about living room and the bathrooms being sanctuaries, which is so much of a Victorian middle class ideal. And so the images that they tried to present were possibly not attainable by everyone, but they certainly were something to strive for. So over 50 images had the word home in the title. This is Home Sweet Home, inspired by the song in the 1830s, Be It Ever So Humble, There's No Place Like Home. They have about 5 images that basically have the same title. And let's see, here's another one as well. And so again, we've got the rural theme, but we also have a very pastoral look. And so hopefully people will be able to take a refuge there. Again, focusing on the rural life, here we have the American homestead in winter. Part of the attraction is the self-sufficiency. If you are living in the city and you feel like your life is basically out of control, if you think back to the way folks did it on the farm, well, you had no other person to help you out, and so you had to be responsible and taking care of your own circumstance and situation. Here we have a spring. Again, we've got the children that are playing in the yard. We've got the sheep, of course, a very pastoral animal as well. Here we have in the fall, the rhythm of life, time to start collecting, harvesting, gathering in, chickens in the farmyard and the like. And then here we have in fall, wait a minute, what was the last one? Summer. Oh, I skipped a season. My apologies. So here we have the harvest that's happening. We've got the gentleman picking apples and the like out of the trees so that we're saving for the future. Again, following with that whole idea of thrift and being self-sufficient, taking care of yourself. Winter. I had to put this slide in because there are so many images that Currier and Ives created about winter. I would like to do a little bit more research as to why they focus so many images on that. But as I may have mentioned just a little bit ago, farms were self-sustaining. But one of the reasons, if you're living in a city with all the conveniences, there are dependencies. The amount of people that froze to death in the city because of not being able to get the food that they need, or houses that were drafty, apartment buildings that were drafty and unable to be heated and things like that. And so my impulse is that Currier and Ives were putting the rural winter scenes up as role models, and so that's what I'm assuming they're going on. So we also have the seasons of life. Here we have the idyllic children that are out playing in the field, as opposed to the city kids who are playing in the lots and the streets and the like. Here we have some romance going on in the middle of a wheat field, path along the wheat field. We've got in the back, we've got a church with a tall steeple, so very much a religious oriented circumstance as well. Now, several of the commentators, I almost wanted to blow this one up a lot larger. Several of the commentators that I read pointed out that this is probably the most stereotypical vision of a Victorian house in the particular era. The lady of the house, of course, is at home with the children. She's been working very, very hard to make a pleasant and happy home for the husband. The husband is coming home from his workaday world. Notice they've got some printed carpet on the floor. There's a chair, a runner on the steps. We've got the hall tree with the hats and the wraps. And so just a very pastoral scene of a very nice and affluent middle class family that you should aspire to. And then of course we get to old age. Folks that have been saving all their lives, that don't necessarily have to keep working, that can relax and enjoy their time with their grandchildren, again, seated by the fire. One person did note kind of humorously that the picture of folks in their old age is also a winter picture, which I suppose kind of goes along with the theme, the winter of life and the end of life. So, but here we have a very comfortable folks in their retirement, while the rest of society, very few people could actually retire. Most people kept working until they died. So, roles. What should a person do? I love this particular image largely because here we have a woman who admired her gold and pearl jewelry the day before her wedding. And now that 9 months after the wedding, she has her first child. And now that the child has become her treasure. So if you'll pause just a second, I'm going to grab a glass of water. So if you've heard me talk before, talking about the cult of domesticity, they are certainly buying into the whole idea of home as a refuge, of mother raising children, providing a very happy home. But I love the comment halfway down that she's very, very content with her decision to marry, even though it has changed her life dramatically. So They also believe very strongly in modesty and decorum, and I love this particular image. Here we have a husband and wife that are flirting while the children are not watching because their hats are tipped over their head. So I thought that was, there are quite a few that are somewhat along the same line. So now, what is the proper role of women? Ah, yes. Currier and Ives were not in favor of the women's rights movement in this particular era. This satirical image you can see, we've got a gentleman taking care of the baby while he's being scolded by his wife. On the far left, we have a lady who's smoking a cigar because they're taking on the business of men, and so they're beginning to act like men. I think the hairstyles are just utterly hilarious. The next image, here we have another image of the ladies who are going out to do the business while the men are at home doing the laundry, taking care of the babies and the like, and so usurping the role of the man. So definitely not a fan of independent women. And also there, they also spend a lot of their images were just for fun and for entertainment purposes. Um, if you think the author that wrote this quote was referencing the dime novels that were very popular at the time as well. And so can't you imagine this particular image being the front of a dime novel story that goes along with it? Here we have action and adventure, and you could probably sit and look at that picture for hours, picking out all the different details and things that are going on. So they also printed quite a few of today, I guess we would call them word searches, or well, that would be of the same time. Anyways, so you've got lots of different animals that are hiding within the camouflage, and so you're supposed to find as many as you can. So there's a whole line of picture puzzles that created that were very popular with children and adults, I should mention as well. So, oh, good, I did include this one. Um, Hunting, which had been a way of life, a necessity in the rural part of life, was now becoming more of a leisure type of an activity. They also had pointed satire. Here we have in the top right, the hunters that are shooting the first birds of the season. We have what, 6 guys right there that are all shooting at the same bird, which means no bird is going to be left by the time that they are done. So we've got nostalgia, but we've also got some comedy mixed at the same time. So now, unfortunately, there was a darker side for Currier and Ives, and unfortunately, it represented some of the unresolved issues that people had, and in response to the different cultures that were joining our country through immigration. Um, there was a strong prejudice against the Chinese, and here we have a a person of Chinese descent who is playing poker with 2 other gentlemen. He is winning and winning and winning, and the gentlemen are sure that he is cheating, and so there were quite a few laws that at the particular time that prohibited folks from China from becoming citizens. They were good as workers, but not for residences. So, but this was a very popular print. There were a whole series of prints that were very, very popular. Also, now that the South has rejoined the Union after the Civil War, uh, they toned down a lot of they never really had a very strong anti-slavery message, but they toned down quite a bit. Um, So here we have a picture of plantation life, disputing the Uncle Tom's Cabin idea that maybe things were not really so bad for folks in the South. Um, and what it does is reflects the problems that people were having in integrating the African American folks into the rest of society. And so, but by far the most controversial in our modern times was what were called the Dark Town prints. Um, Basically, is a satirical look at basically African American people who are trying to act like white people. And while I was looking through these, I had a hard time. How do I want to say it? Unfortunately, the racism, the anti-black feeling that was a part of the prints, I had to look a long time and had to discard quite a few. But here's an example of what we have. This is called the Great Oyster Eating Match. And if you can just take a look at the images here, we've got the bug-eyed, the large lips, the gentleman with the stomach that's protruding, just lots and lots of images that are quite stereotypical and quite racist. The unfortunate thing is that these particular images, even though they were sold after the Reconstruction, after 1877, were very, very, very good sellers, and they made an awful lot of money. So it goes to show you the degree of uncomfortableness people had in our era about the role of folks of different races in our society. Currier and Ives does not live on forever, though. They eventually die out. A couple of things that were going on. By the middle of the 1880s, they switched to automatic printing as opposed to hand painting, which allowed them to print more, but the quality of their work also declined. Um, they also were being left in the dust by photography. With new advances in photography, it was becoming more of an accessible hobby, more of an accessible art, and you could actually show people pictures rather than drawing of pictures. And as to the art itself, well, Currier and Ives was looking a little bit clunky, a little bit rough, unpolished. And the idea of middle class people having Currier and Ives prints in their parlor was definitely something that was falling out of favor. But for the 40 years, 50 years that Currier and Ives were in business, they did help in as a transition, or at least help people manage the challenges that were happening in society, helping people cope with the industry. But at the same time, it really didn't help people to address the challenges and things that were going on in the urban environment as more and more of a population moved in that particular direction. So, but Currier and Ives, I think, is a wonderful way for historians like myself to get a pretty good idea of what lifestyle was like in our era. One always has to take a bit of salt that they were printed for pop. They're not meant to be historical recreations, but that they are images. And so one has to take a little bit of grain of salt when looking at them. But anyways, let's think if there's anything else I can say about it. So that kind of comes to the end of what I was wanting to go ahead and present. Um, if you're interested, if you have some comments or some questions, let me go ahead and stop the share and if you'd like to raise your hand, or I'm going to go ahead and invite you to talk if you would like to. Should be able to be heard by all the other folks online if you're interested, or if you'd rather go ahead and type something, that would be fine as well. So, anyone have any comments or questions that I can address?
Well, I do.
Yes.
I was just going to say that when I first was introduced to Currier and Ives was by, it seems like Christmas cards. It seems like they're pictures on Christmas cards. And then when you said that you'd like to explore why they had so many winter scenes, yeah, I hope you do, because I had no idea of what Currier and Ives was as far as the skill in portraits and hanging on people's walls and everything. By the time I was looking at them, I just saw everything as Christmas cards. That's all I ever knew them to be.
Yeah, and that's quite true. But that is what most modern people are familiar with, are their Christmas images. So you'd be right in line with the rest of the population. Well, they do make some very nice nostalgic, dashing through the snow and that sort of thing. Although today I'm not sure whether dashing through the snow is something very many people would look forward to.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks. Anyone else have any other comments or questions? Okay, well, first of all, I thank you for joining us for this experiment in virtual lectures. It's quite a different feature. I never thought I would do something like this, and I certainly am learning a lot. You should be getting an email in the next couple of days asking for your responses, and if you've got any observations about your experiences, um, please, let us know if there are some things that you think that you could help us do to make it better. It's a rather impersonal method. I really miss not having you folks in front of me so I can respond. So anyways, 2 weeks from now, we will have the Beginning Wichita series, and we'll be focusing on Meade, Greifenstein, some of the early settlers who came and helped start our part of the world. So hope that you'll stop by and listen to us. So
I'm really looking forward to hearing those series about the Native American that were in this area.
well, good. I'm excited about them. I'm glad we're finally able to do something like that. So, well, thank you all for coming. I'm going to go ahead and end the discussion now.